Channel open. Welcome back to WeeklyTrek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on March 6th, 2020, and is current through the Star Trek Picard episode Nepenthe, so beware of spoilers. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
WeeklyTrek is a 30-minute news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. We are in a new golden age of Star Trek. There are 5 television shows in production, possibly more on the way, and enough merchandise to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me, and I'll help you sort the real facts from a lot of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. But I can't do this alone. And my guest this week is returning guest, Patrick Escudero. Patrick, welcome back to WeeklyTrek.
Thank you for having me again, Alex. I'm surprised to be asked back.
Why? You always do such a great job.
No, I'm kidding. I love it, and I'm so excited to be back again. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure, and I'm thrilled to have you. Well, Patrick, you know the drill. I want to know something that's got you feeling good about Star Trek at the moment. What's got you moving at Warp 10?
I think the most obvious answer here for anyone that's watched Picard this week is the latest episode, Nepenthe. And I'm going to not use that as what has me really excited about Trek.
Okay.
What really has me going the last couple of weeks is Michael Chabon himself.
Yes, sir.
He's been on Instagram answering tons of fan questions about each episode. He has no obligation to do any of this for anybody, and he's just taken it upon himself with some good questions and some, not so good questions. Just really taking the time to put himself out there, what he was thinking, what his thought process was, what the thought process of the entire writer's room was. I love it. And I really am thankful to him for just taking that time and kind of interacting with fans in a way that he doesn't have to do it, but he's just such a big Trek fan himself. I think he's probably enjoying it almost as much as we are asking the questions.
Yeah, I've heard somebody liken it too, and I actually didn't have any experience of this when Deep Space Nine was on, but Ron Moore used to do these AOL chats where he would kind of park up in a chat room and just respond to people live as they were pitching him questions, and people really loved that. It was a great opportunity. It was one of the first sort of examples of the internet being used in that kind of way to connect fans and creators, and Chabon's interactions are in that vaunted tradition. And as you say, I mean, A, he doesn't owe it to anybody. B, it's really great. I mean, the number of questions that he grapples with, things that he kind of teases or, helps you understand a little better or understand the motivations behind. They really, really do an excellent job of deepening your experience and appreciation for each individual episode. But yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, I think it's really given me a deeper perspective on how things go from idea to story to screen, and just, his thought process and the writer's room thought process on why we made this story decision versus something else. And I'm not saying it's necessary to enjoy the series by reading what he's saying, but it's definitely kind of filled in some gaps for me.
And frankly, it has helped take the sting out of the tail of a few narrative decisions that, maybe I didn't agree with or didn't sit so well with me, one of which we'll get to because it's connected to one of the stories for this week's episode.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I am going to give you an opportunity to gush about the most recent episode because I am going with the obvious choice for what I'm feeling good about Star Trek this week, and it is the Riker and Troy plotline from the most recent episode, Nepenthe, so the episode's like an hour long. It's not all Riker, Troy, Picard, Kestra, and Soji, but there's probably a good 35 to 40 minutes that just focus on those characters. So we'll set aside the La Sirena and the Artifact storylines. Nepenthe as an episode about Riker and Troy is probably one of the best episodes of Star Trek there has ever been, without question, bar none, in terms of providing us with this amazing character piece that reintroduces us to these two amazing characters in a way that is both really important to the story. I mean, Picard learns a lot over the course of the hour, but also gives us this great reintroduction to these characters who have had a lot happen to them in the last several decades. Some of it good, not all of it good. We know that they have 2 children and one of them has passed away by this point in the show. But just the interactions between all those characters. Kestra, played by Lulu Wilson, was just an incredible character, played really, really well by the actress, so well written. Seeing Jonathan and Marina return to play those roles effortlessly, Marina knocks it out of the park. I mean, them and Patrick and Issa Briones and the actress who plays Kestra turn in amazing performances that all create just this extremely compelling storyline throughout this episode that gives us an opportunity to pause and take a breath after last week's kind of frantic, action-packed episode, but also moves these characters' story arcs forward in a way that wasn't just let's put Riker and Troy in there because it'd be cool to do so and the fans would want it. So, Patrick, here's your opportunity. Tell me what you thought about Nepenthe.
No, I loved it. Definitely some of the B and C story points that I won't talk about were interesting choices, but that A storyline of Riker, Troy, Picard, Kestra, Soji, it was fantastic. It didn't seem gimmicky to me at all. Like you mentioned that, Riker and Troy were back. It was at the end of that last episode, Picard really has limited choices. What is he going to do? Where is he going to go? He knows that he can get to Riker and Troy via, that transport method. And he chooses that. He says in this episode, it was kind of like a desperation act on his part. And it really serves to kind of reset him a little bit, I think, because he finally has 2 people that aren't afraid, especially with Troy, who Marina was just fantastic in this episode, that she had me tearing up a couple of times, to really tell him, like, look, you have this mission that you've taken on and you're feeling very righteous about it, but you've got to remember that this girl, she may be an android, but her whole life is being torn apart in the last 24 hours, basically. And you need to understand that and figure out how to deal with that rather than just kind of being on your gallant mission, not that he's not paying attention to her, but just understanding her a little bit better than he has so far. And Kestra, Lulu Wilson was the actress. Unbelievable. I actually thought that maybe she was a little bit older than what the age of the character was supposed to be in real life, but she's very young actress. And she was amazing. I mean, really just fantastic. And her interaction, and I thought there was some really good chemistry between her and Issa, who plays Soji. Those were some of the most touching scenes. And kind of they have this shared pain, Kestra losing a brother, Soji losing her sister, and basically losing what she thought was her entire life, and saying, like, my parents helped me through it. Maybe instead of pushing him away, look to Picard to kind of help you through the same thing. Just some amazing scenes there. It really was a top-notch Star Trek episode. And I think in the years coming, like you said, we're going to be talking about it as one of the best, not of Picard, not of New Trek, but of, all the series.
Oh, so good. All right. Well, with that, let's turn to the week's top stories.
There's a war going on, and I'm a reporter.
So our top story this week is an exciting one. It is the 25th anniversary of the premiere of Star Trek Voyager. We are now well into the 25th anniversary year, and an announcement for the 25th anniversary, 455 Films, and the team behind such Star Trek documentary features as For the Love of Spock, Chaos on the Bridge, and What We Left Behind, the Deep Space Nine documentary, have announced that they have started work on a Voyager retrospective documentary. David Zappone, who was producer behind the movies that I mentioned, put on his social media, and then the Star Trek crews put out an email blast that 455 Films would be participating in the cruise, and they were using the opportunity to shoot interview footage both with the cast of Star Trek Voyager and with some fans who were on the cruise as well. Much like the Deep Space Nine documentary was an intercut between interviews with the cast and interviews with fans. It looks like this Voyager documentary is going to be the same. We know very little else other than they're doing it. They're already shooting footage. I would anticipate, given that particularly For the Love of Spock and What We Left Behind both had a crowd-funded element to it, that once they get some footage in the can, that there will almost certainly be a crowdfunder for the Voyager documentary. But this is very exciting news. Patrick, how you feeling? Voyager documentary on the way.
No, I'm excited. And I'm probably not the biggest Voyager fan out there. It's the one Trek where I've probably seen the least number of episodes. But it's a lot of people's first Trek. And in fact, a good friend of mine that I used to work with, he's a couple of years younger than me. So he didn't grow up, in the heyday of TNG or even the beginning of DS9. But his first introduction to Star Trek was Voyager. So that reminds me that there are so many people that love Janeway Chakotay, Seven of Nine, and have a deep appreciation and connection to these characters. So I'm really glad that we're going to see, another series, just like DS9 did, get its due, get to tell its behind-the-scenes stories, things that maybe we haven't heard before. And maybe if there's that crowdfunding element, there could be some HD upgrades like they did in the DS9 documentary. I wouldn't mind seeing a little of that from some of the more famous Voyager episodes.
Yeah, that would be extremely exciting if they were able to pull that off. Obviously, for the Deep Space Nine documentary, they were able to do so because it was so popular and they raised so much money as part of the crowdfunder that it was within the realm of possibility for them to do so. And all of that footage just looks absolutely glorious and maybe the only time we see any Deep Space Nine footage in high definition. So yeah, it would be incredible if the fan community's response was on par with the Deep Space Nine documentary so we could get the same thing again for Voyager. I'd love to see some of those iconic scenes remastered in high definition for the big screen. That'd be awesome.
And I'm glad that the kind of filming is being started on the cruise, which a lot of our kind of mutual Twitter friends and Trekkie friends are on the cruise right now. I haven't heard too much in terms of any, I went and looked for it a little bit. Did anybody mention that the film crew was around or if there were any fan interviews that were happening? I'm sure they have, but maybe they're not supposed to be talking about it or something like that at this point. But yeah, I'm glad that it's starting with kind of this big fan celebration of the 25th anniversary of Voyager on the cruise. And I'm assuming it'll probably spill over a little bit to STLV, maybe some more fan interviews and footage for the documentary. So I'm glad when these things are really fan driven, people that are so connected to these characters get to kind of have their voices heard and also put their money out if they want to, if they are able to help fund these things. And, DS9 was a big success. And I think a Voyager documentary could be similar in vein. There are a lot of fans.
All I'll say is if a Voyager documentary does not have at least one interview snippet with former Weekly Trek guest and Star Trek Voyager maven and extraordinaire Marina Kravchuk, it would be a crying shame. So, David, if you're listening, make sure you include Marina in the documentary. All right. Well, our second story this week is an interview with Jonathan del Arco, which was published in the wake of this week's episode, Nepenthe. And obviously, there is a big moment in the episode in which Hugh dies. He is killed by Narissa. A narrative choice, which is one of those choices that when I was alluding to in our discussion about Michael Chabon, I don't necessarily like very much. But having read some of the things he has said and heard his perspective on it on the Picard podcast, I understand it. But this is an interview that Jonathan del Arco did with Swapna Krishna over at Sci-Fi Wire. And it's about his sort of whole kind of legacy with the character from when we first saw him in I, Borg through now the end of the character, or the seeming end of the character with his death in the most recent episode. And there are a few pieces of the interview that I thought were really interesting. He talked about the parallels between, so Jonathan is a member of the LGBT community. He's gay. He's also an immigrant. He's Uruguayan American. And he talked about some of the similarities between the Star Trek Picard storyline of these ex-Bs, these ex-Borg, who are sort of pariahs within the society in which they find themselves, and liken some of those struggles to the difficulties he has faced as both a member of the gay community and an immigrant throughout his life. And so I think, for him, having played this role was one, that allowed him to sort of explore some themes from his own life as well. He talked a little bit about how his initial portrayal of Hugh from The Next Generation had actually been based off of a former partner that he'd had who had passed away as part of the AIDS epidemic in the late 80s. And that, he had based that performance as a tribute to his partner who had suffered from dementia in the later stages of the disease and had taken on this sort of childlike innocence quality that we saw with Third of Five when we were first introduced to him. And he talked about how in Nepenthe, that first scene where Narissa is sort of executing the other ex-Bs to try and get Hugh to reveal where Picard and Soji had gone, that in a lot of ways through that, he was channeling the survivor's guilt that he felt from having survived his partner who had passed away, but that the conclusion of the character's arc was sort of a therapeutic one for him because it allowed him to kind of draw that to a close. Also talked about how the hug between Picard and Hugh in the last episode, which was one of the best moments of that episode, I was actually not scripted. It was something worked out between Jonathan and Patrick Stewart in rehearsal. And then when he's asked about that final scene and how he feels about Hugh having died in the episode, I'll just read a little bit of his response to that. He said, "I want people to feel what they feel and process their feelings about it, because I'm sure there will be plenty. Because I think when you have characters that are part of your life for such a long time and you have ownership of them, I just want them to know that I'm okay, and that I'm very happy with the work, and I feel like we did a great job, and the series is great, and they should keep watching it and enjoying it the way I will." Well, Patrick, it certainly seems like this is a decision, a narrative decision as part of the show that is pretty controversial, but I've expressed it's one that I'm not super thrilled about. So please feel free to talk about your reaction to it. But also, this was a great little interview with Jonathan, don't you think?
This was a great interview. I think a few of the things I had heard from him before in previous interviews, but what really did stick out for me was that last part of the interview where he says, "I just want them to know that I'm okay." And it was a decision when I first saw the episode, when it was pretty much right as the episode was online. I didn't like it. I was not a fan. In fact, I was a little bit mad, maybe even more than a little bit, because I just didn't think it made any sense overall. I just didn't think it was necessary, because you get the threat of it earlier in the episode.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it kind of comes out of nowhere that Narissa looks like she's going to attack Eleanor, and then turns around and all of a sudden Hugh is gone. And I think he played it beautifully. And the interaction between Eleanor and Hugh in that scene was very lovely, very sad. But it kind of made me feel better to hear, what Jonathan says, that, I'm doing okay. I'm happy with the work. I feel like we did a great job. If he truly believes that, then, it kind of makes me as a fan a lot more okay with the narrative decision to kill Hugh. And I was really touched also, going back to the beginning of the interview, by what he had said about his partner years ago that had dementia as part of his illness. And he used that to actually play to Hugh's innocence. I thought that was very, very touching, and was probably very difficult for him, not only back then, but to then kind of revisit that now here at the end of Hugh. So if he's okay with it, I'm okay with it. That's all I'll say. I would have liked to see more of him. I liked how Hugh had grown. He had become a leader. He was thinking about not only himself and what was going to happen to him, he was thinking about his fellow XPs. That's what his driving force was to care for them, to make sure that their transition from being Borg to being humanoid again was easier maybe than what he went through. And we don't really know what he went through after the events of the Descent episode in TNG. But I loved what they were doing with the character, and I felt like there could have been a lot more to explore with him. But again, if Jonathan is okay with it, then I will take that and say, all right, I'm fine.
I think that's the right way to look at it. I just wish we'd had more time to explore this character and what had happened to him between when we last saw him in the Next Generation episode and Descent, and when he pops up again in Star Trek Picard. I'm sure they will publish a novel at some point in the near future that will fill in that gap, but it would have been nice to just get more on screen. And also, given the story seems to be moving towards this idea of liberating these former Borg from oppression by the Romulans, it would have been really nice for Hugh to have been part of that. And, the previews for next week's episode and the final few seconds of the episode imply that Seven's on her way back, probably to serve that role. But it would have been nice to have seen Seven and Hugh alongside each other, working to right this wrong. And sad we won't get the character for that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. After that kind of the first part where there was the threat of him dying, it didn't happen. I'm thinking near the end of that episode when Hugh and Eleanor are walking through the hallway talking about, he's saying, all right, I'm getting these people out of here. I'm done with this Romulan nonsense. I'm thinking, great, this is going to be amazing. We're going to see Hugh kind of become even more of a leader and take these XPs to their freedom, as opposed to what they've been going through on the artifact. And it just didn't happen. And it's very disappointing. And I was even thinking to myself at one point, it would have made for a great short trek to maybe see something that was significant in Hugh's life between the events of Descent and where we see him pick up in Star Trek Picard. They have the assets for Borg Cube and a lot of those sets and stuff, and it would have been great to maybe see how did he become the Reclamation Project leader. And just, there was definitely, like you said, there was more that we could have explored, a lot more. And it's sad that we maybe won't get to do that.
Well, our third story this week is both very sad, but also a source of great inspiration, I think. Kenneth Mitchell, who played Cole on Star Trek Discovery, also Cole Shah and Tanavik, announced through an interview with People magazine this past week that he's actually been diagnosed with ALS, which you may also know as Lou Gehrig's disease, which is a disease of the motor neurons that slowly over the progression of the disease, the person suffering from it loses the ability to control their muscles. He announced he's been living with the condition since August of 2018. Another very famous person you may know who was an ALS sufferer was Dr. Stephen Hawking, who had a cameo on Star Trek Next Generation, actually in Descent Part 1, which also had Jonathan del Arco. Well, I guess actually he didn't appear until the second episode. Kenneth made this announcement because with the progression of the disease, it's become very difficult for him to conceal the fact that he has it. He does now use a wheelchair largely to get around, but he was talking in the interview about how the productions that he works with, both Star Trek, since he's done Star Trek since he was diagnosed with the disease, and then also the Nancy Drew CW show that he's been on, have been very accommodating of his condition. The announcement was made actually a few days before the Star Trek cruise, where Kenneth is an announced guest. And yes, he is on the cruise, which as we record is taking place right now. And I have to say, the social media that I've seen about the cruise and Kenneth's participation in it is really inspirational. I mean, here is a man who has received a very difficult diagnosis, who is still interacting with the fans, is still enjoying his life, is still, living to the max. And there's this, I think they had a villains party one of the nights on the cruise, and there are pictures of Kenneth Mitchell crowd surfing through the crowd of fans who were collected in whatever the venue was where the party was taking place. And that was such an emotional and affecting set of pictures to see this group of people. I mean, everybody knows he's suffering from this. He is in a wheelchair. Lifting him up and carrying him through the crowd was really fabulous to see. So our love and our thoughts go out to Kenneth Mitchell for all of the work he has done, and frankly, all of the work that he still hopefully has yet to do, either within the Star Trek universe or without. But Patrick, I don't know if you've been seeing any of their social media around Kenneth's cruise appearances, but it is a really inspirational thing to see, don't you think?
It really is. And I've seen pretty much all of it. I've seen video clips of him crowd surfing and just the fans embracing, and even the people. Everybody is holding him up, and there's people that have their hands up just in case he makes it over to them. It just reminded me, and I mentioned this in a few Twitter threads for people that posted it, that it just reminds me of the love and the support that you get from the Star Trek community that sometimes maybe we forget a little bit about with some toxic online comments that we may see, or hopefully the cast and crew don't see them, but we know they do. Universally, Ken has been shown so much love, and he's acknowledged that and even posted about it himself on social media. And it's just inspiring that he's living the best life that he can with what life has thrown at him. He's not hiding. And he even says in the People article, he wouldn't judge anybody, and I wouldn't either, if they felt that they needed to kind of stay out of the public spotlight. But he's embracing what's been given, and he's still out there having fun and hanging out and being with the fans. And it really is an inspiration. And I honestly teared up a little bit at some of those social media posts that people were putting up online at that party. It was unbelievable. And you've seen the support not only from fans, but fellow Star Trek cast members all across every iteration. There's been so many people that have posted. It's hard to put into words. I'm very inspired by the fact that he's chosen to not only share, such an intimate thing with all of us, but then turn up after the big article, a couple of days later on a cruise for 7-8 days with a bunch of fans, and is just loving it. It's amazing to see.
We are with you, Kenneth, and we'll support you any way we can. It has been a number of years since the Ice Bucket Challenge made donations to research to cure ALS a popular meme moment on social media. But if you were thinking about making donations to charity this year, I hope you will consider adding research for cure to ALS to to your list of causes. Well, we will move on from there to a first look for the Star Trek Online Starships collection. So this was announced at STLV last summer that there would be a initially 10-part collection of starships from Star Trek Online as part of the Eaglemoss Star Trek Starships collection. One of the bonus editions had been the Star Trek Online Enterprise F, and that appears to have sold well enough that the company has decided to make other ships from the game, which is very exciting. So the first two ships will be the Gagarin-class Federation battlecruiser and the Chimera-class heavy destroyer. These will be the first two issues in the line. Both are expected to be released in May. They are the same size as the regular Starships collection, so the smallest of the ship designs that are available from Eaglemoss. But just like all Eaglemoss ships, these look great. I think they look really good, even though I'm not a Star Trek Online player, but I am pleased that my guest is a Star Trek Online player. So Patrick, let's hear your reaction. What do you think about these ships?
I was actually in the panel, sitting there, listening to the announcement of the Star Trek Online ships, which included, I believe his name is Thomas Maroney, who's one of the main ship artists from Star Trek Online, who's responsible for a number of the designs. And the first two that are coming out are great choices for various reasons. The first one is an updated version of the Shepard class that we've seen in Star Trek Discovery, so the USS Gagarin. They've taken pretty much a lot of the Discovery era ships and updated them to be more 25th century, I'll call it. And that's when Star Trek Online takes place. The game has been around for 10 years as of last month, but it takes place over the years 2409, 2410, and 2411. So to update the 23rd century Discovery era stuff, they changed some of the cells, changed some color schemes, changed other parts, and really make it look like a 24th, 25th century aesthetic. And that's what the Gagarin class, the first one of the ships being released, is. It looks amazing. And one of the kind of benefits, and I know Eaglemoss, Ben Robinson at Eaglemoss has mentioned this before, when they can get kind of the full 3D asset, it makes for a lot more detailed ship in the end for them. Sometimes it's hard with some of the older ships, the older designs, that maybe there isn't a full 3D model available. But for Star Trek Online, they're pretty much going to be able to get whatever ship they choose to release. They'll be able to have a full 3D model that's going to make them look gorgeous. And I think that's one of the benefits we've seen in the Eaglemoss Discovery collection is since Discovery's so new, they've been able to get the 3D models, and some of their best work, in my opinion, has been in that Discovery collection. So it's looking like a lot of the same here for the Star Trek Online collection. The second ship, the Chimera, happens to be captained by Nog in Star Trek Online. So in the Star Trek Online canon, which is an official canon, it's a soft canon with lots of stories, Nog is the captain of the USS Chimera, the first Ferengi to join Starfleet, and I'm believing the first Ferengi to become a captain in Starfleet. So that's a good choice, obviously, since we lost Aaron Eisenberg very recently. I think it's a good tribute to have his ship out there. And interestingly enough, the Chimera class itself was the runner-up to the design for the next Enterprise, which they held in 2011 and resulted in the Odyssey class, which people know now is the Enterprise F in Star Trek Online. So the Chimera is actually was almost the winner in this contest and is now, Captain Nog's starship. So I think it's a great choice. And from what I've seen so far, I'm really loving the color schemes, because in Star Trek Online, like many multiplayer online games, you can do a ton of customization yourself to coloring and just how everything looks for whether it's a character or a ship. And what they've chosen to go with here, I think, is very, very nice from what I've seen. So hoping to see some more. I haven't seen any announcements on what after the first two are going to be, but I definitely have some preferences myself from having played the game for so long. But yeah, this is definitely something that's going to be taking a chunk out of my wallet. So thank you. Thank you, Hero Collector. Appreciate it.
They do seem to find a way, don't they?
Oh, they do.
All right. Well, we've talked about the facts, and now let's speculate on what's going to happen in the future of Star Trek.
You make some very good points, Captain. But it's still all speculation and theory.
So each week, I and my guest give you a wish or theory we're nurturing about Picard, Discovery, Lower Decks, any of the upcoming shows, merchandise, future of the franchise. So Patrick, let's hear your theory or wish for this week.
All right. So my theory for this week is, as we get closer to the end of the season with Picard, people are, starting to think, are we going to see the Enterprise? Is it going to be something that shows up at that last moment when Picard really needs help? My guess is going to be no. I don't think we're going to see the Enterprise, but I think we might see another quote-unquote hero ship. I'm going to go with the USS Verity, which if you have read the Last Best Hope prequel novel or the Star Trek Picard Countdown comic, was the ship that Picard, once he was promoted to Admiral, took over to oversee the Romulan rescue. That was the flagship for that entire endeavor, and he was in command of that for a number of years based on the novel The Last Best Hope. It happens to be an Odyssey-class starship from Star Trek Online. The first time we've seen that outside of Star Trek Online and in the comics. Now, the comic obviously isn't definitely canon, but it comes very close. So I would love to see that. Maybe we don't see the Enterprise. Maybe Sir Patrick Stewart doesn't want to rehash that and bring the Enterprise into it. But maybe we see the Verity, which was his ship for a number of years. And that's something that I would love to see personally, to kind of make something in Star Trek Online officially canon. But we'll see. That's my prediction. I think we might see a hero ship like that kind of come to his aid near the end.
Yeah, I think we're going to have some kind of moment like that. I would assume there is some big surprise they've been keeping under wraps. I also agree with you. I don't think it's the Enterprise, because I think that's way too reminiscent of a beat from Star Trek Discovery Season 1, where the last moment of the season is that, aha, here's the Enterprise moment. Like, as much as I think it would make sense for that to be what happens in Picard, right? They finish whatever this adventure is, and then, they're all back aboard La Sirena, and we're receiving a distress call, and boom, there comes the Enterprise E. It's just, they've done that already. So it feels like it's got to be something different. I mean, I do think we'll see the Enterprise eventually at some point over the 3 seasons of the show, but I agree with you. I don't think it will be before the end of season 1. And they have really held back on giving us Starfleet and sort of any Starfleet anything. And I think we might get a little something before the end of the season. And I think that would be a perfect way to do it. I mean, ultimately, Picard sort of running off around the galaxy is going to get more of Starfleet's notice. And there will be some kind of meeting with a ship or an admiral or a captain or something, and it would make sense for something like that to happen before the end of the season. So I like that theory a lot.
Riker did say that him and Troy are still on active reserve, which I thought was an interesting line to throw in there near the end of the episode Nepenthe. So maybe he's the one that calls up Starfleet and says, look, we know Picard left in disgrace and has been a hermit, but we need to do something here. So maybe he calls in a few favors.
I would absolutely love that. I did also note that line, and it was one of those lines that it feels like Shaban, who was one of the co-writers of this episode, it doesn't feel like he writes things just for the point of writing them.
Exactly.
They do feel like there's a point to a lot of the things that he puts down on the page. And I so hope that there was a point to that particular line, and that it portends that at some point in the future, Riker's going to put that captain's uniform back on and get involved in the rest of the story somehow, some way. All right. Well, my theory this week is another listener submission. Thank you to Ron Roble, former guest of the show at Trekker. Creation Entertainment have said that there is a big guest announcement for STLV this year that they will be unveiling on March the 16th. The only details they've given about who this guest is that they are a major movie star, and this will be their first time appearing at a Creation Entertainment show and at Star Trek Las Vegas. So it's not going to be Carl Urban or Zachary Quinto or John Cho or Simon Pegg, because all those guys have already been to Star Trek Las Vegas. So obviously it's kicked off a lot of speculation. Could it be Chris Pine, who played Captain Kirk in the Kelvin Timeline movies? Could it be Benedict Cumberbatch, who played Khan in Star Trek Into Darkness? Idris Elba, who was in Star Trek Beyond? Ron's theory is that this major first-time attendee guest is actually going to be Michelle Yeoh, and that part of her appearance will be tied to telling us more about this Section 31 show that we know is in development and theoretically is headed into production soon. Patrick, are you on board with the Michelle Yeoh idea, or do you think it's someone else?
I am. And in fact, I think that's exactly what I posted on social media. Michelle Yeoh was my guess for the exact reasons that Ron has. Section 31 is in development. By the time we get to August, it's, we assume it's going to be close to shooting or already shooting. So what better way to either make some sort of big announcement related to the show or even show some sort of teaser than to have the star of the show there. So I think it makes the most sense that it would be Michelle. Now, I will say I would take Chris Pine. I would probably be one of the first on board for a photo op there this year with Chris if he were to show up. And that also makes a little bit of sense because Robert Pine, his father, is making an appearance for what I believe is the first time in a long time at STV.
Correct. Yes, he is.
So it does make a little bit of sense there that it could be Chris Pine, but my money right now is still on Michelle Yeoh.
Yeah, also my money would be on Michelle Yeoh, but there is compelling evidence that it could potentially be Chris Pine as well. Regardless, it's going to be great, and let's keep our fingers crossed that this coronavirus thing does not negatively impact STLV happening this year. But that's a long way away, and we'll have to see what happens. Do you have a theory or a wish for Discovery, Picard, or the future of the franchise that you'd like to share? Tweet them to me at WeeklyTrek, and I might feature your theory on a future episode. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode of Weekly Trek. Thank you so much to my guest, Patrick Escudero, for joining me today. Patrick, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation?
Definitely find me on Twitter at PatrickE34. I love to talk Trek. It's pretty much all I do on Twitter these days, so definitely hit me up if you want to discuss, speculate, or all the above.
And you can find this show on Twitter at WeeklyTrek and me at Alexander T. Perry. And if you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And if you submit a 5-star review before March the 20th, you screenshot it and you send it to me, you will be in for a chance to win one of 2 prizes, either an Eagle Moss XL size Katinga class Klingon battlecruiser or a copy of the aforementioned Last Best Hope, the Star Trek Picard prequel novel by Una McCormack. So get your reviews in, send me a screenshot, and you'll be entered for a chance to win one of those 2 prizes. For more information, find at WeeklyTrek on Twitter about how to enter. And if you like our shows, please also consider becoming a Patreon of Tricorder, which you can find at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And lastly, if you're looking for Star Trek news on the internet, I hope you will turn to trekcore.com. Well, thank you, Patrick. Thank you to all of my listeners. And until next week, live long and prosper.